Great. So thank you for this opportunity. It's lovely to do it through Skype. I hope that we still would have the connection because Skype sometimes it's problematic, but I wouldn't talk about it and talk about the lecture. So yeah, and I really regret that I cannot be there in the Minsk because your program looks really great, interesting to uh, to experience that, not just to see it from the distance. But anyway, so I have the lecture under the title Adolescent Cities, an Infected and Ambiguous Public Space. So, a visually communicating public space is an urban entity subjected to usurpation for the purpose of profit making. It reflects the political system of the society, and its form reflects the level of culture in the society. I believe that the rising commercialization of public space is a problem that will have to be dealt with in the future. When the showers of public swimming pools, the tablet at restaurants, the back covers of restaurant menu, as well as the toilet paper dispenser become advertising spaces, it is obvious that such a visual burden becomes problematic for numerous reasons. My lecture is dedicated to interpreting the urban environment. It is the cities where the most capital and the government power is accumulated. The history of the evolution of urban planning provides an insight into some of the strategies which are closely related to the historical progress which has led to the post-industrial society today. So in the lecture, I would quote from Richard Sennett, often who's the famous social scientist. And in this book, Uses of Disorder, which was written in 1970, he's dealing with the term of adolescent. So I use this comparison of people in the public space or people in the city or society as such to the position of adolescent, which we are probably pretty much in. Yeah, so and then I also use a lot from Pascal Gielen, who is nowadays social scientist, and from his book 4 years ago published Interrupting the City, which is really great. So anyway, in the following lecture, I deal with the perception of cities from the perspective of control and from the perspective of an adolescent, as Richard Sennett labels this phenomenon. Sennett builds on analysis of the history of the evolution of urban planning, which has been determined, as he claims, by a horrifyingly simple set of assumptions since the 19th century. This apprehension is based on a mistrust of technocracy rooted in the Newton Cartesian paradigm of science, the large-scale planning in the style of Baron Haussmann and his urban concept of Paris as a transformation of medieval city into a metropolis with spacious boulevards. So now we see a ground plan of a Paris city, which is kind of like a big, rigid, static structure, which was done by Baron Haussmann during the first half of the 19th century. And what is interesting is that he is a caricature of Baron Haussmann from that era, that he was actually like not renovating but destructing the old city. But what is interesting, he was actually a nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. So this structure, this new structure that predict the agglomeration till nowadays is strongly ideological. Yeah. So, and then there is needed to be mentioned absolutely opposite impulses, the opposite way of perceiving the city, which from the same city, from the Paris, and you probably or sure know the situationist movement during the 50s. And I use this as an opposite way for the structure, because they try to interrupt the structure, but not just the structure of the city, but the mental structure of the city in your heads, which is quite important. So this 150-old-year concept, which led to the domination of expert knowledge over the actual needs of the residents, still remains the most frequent vision applied by large cities in the fastest-growing agglomerations in accordance with the increasing globalization, regardless of its side effects such as segregation of the population, unaffordable housing, the growth of slums, civic unrest, etc. Haussmann created a precedent of urban environment, boulevards to facilitate easy and fast-way army transfers and class separation, as a tool of control and conflict prevention. Then the second half of the 20th century prioritized car traffic at the expense of people. Its infrastructure of prefabricated utility elements such as electric grids, towers, highways, establish an order which suppresses the human dimension and, most importantly, provides little space for changes and the organic life of the society, which, as Sennett emphasizes, cannot be planned in advance. As the term first used to describe this situation by Sennett, in the uses of disorder, suggests the residents and visitors for such cities assume the helpless role of adolescents. The authoritative approach to urban planning contradicts two basic attributes of an adulthood. It's a freedom and responsibility. Pascal Gielen, in his book Interrupting the City, 2015, adopts this Sennett's term and further highlights the strive of the system to leave people in the position of adolescents whose selves are kept in safe and homogeneous comfort zones, which prevent them from testing their identity, gaining independence, and becoming adults. Gielen emphasized the fact, which is important in this respect, that such rules of public space contradict identity. Both cities and adolescents emphasize uniformity, which provides them with easy-to-understand arrangements of their structures and simplified control, but on the downside, according to Sennett, this strategy leads to violence. There is a quotation by Richard Sennett. The process of shaping of a space brings the possibility to influence its residents. This is one of the axioms of urban designers, architects, engineers, representatives of the technical disciplines and group of people who play a substantial role in the creation of the appearance of the cities. And I would remark a little note that this group of people, mainly during the last 20th century, were also a man, so the public space is also the mirror of this. Nevertheless, at this point, I find it more important to focus on semi-official art or art which is intentionally subversive in accordance with Gielen's concept of disturbing the daily routine, rather than to deal with the installation of permanent artistic objects which are designed to eventually become integral parts of their environment. Such a problem-free integration directly contradicts what Sennett, Gielen, and others appeals to: the need to encounter the unknown, to form one's identity on the basis of debate or even confrontation. Unless art is to be limited to the form of non-conflicting exhibitions added to real estate development projects or public spaces, it is necessary to focus on the art of intervention, which, unlike the kind of art mentioned above, preserves its own autonomy, independence, and limited duration. This implies that such art is characterized by intentional kind of conflict or contrast with the context of the given space. So in this case, I would like to mention an example by Austrian artist Oliver Ressler, who is dealing a lot with political issues and so on. And in this piece that is called Resist to Exist, in 2011, he used the motif of Maersk Corporation, which is actually one of the biggest logistic corporations around the world, with the headquarters in Denmark, Copenhagen, to for his art piece to locate their problematics in the Copenhagen. So in this case, we see their headquarters in Denmark, with the property, with the park and some abandoned building around, which was tended by local community to be a part of their activities, to be their kind of community center. But this property was gained by Marx to have it. So actually, Oliver Resler is using this like big corporation scale to very local little case to create the billboard opposite of their headquarters and to use this fences, which is actually put it down to be kind of a demonstration against it, but also as a motive from previous demonstrations and Occupy movements, where these fences were used also as a barbecue grill. So yeah, this is the example. Where the economy becomes more abstract and the real estate market as well as real estate development projects enjoy a virtual absolute freedom. So by Gielen in the late 90s, the spotlight shifted to the creative class. Control escalates into repression, which gives rise to what he labels the creative repressive city. It is important that Claire Bishop, actually she's standing in the middle here. Oh, sorry. Yeah. See this global trend in a similar way. In her prologue to the sculpture project Minster in 2017, in connection with art in the public space, she mentions the so-called POPs, privately owned public space phenomenon. Here, yeah. So these are privately owned areas with the character of a public space, such as lobbies, city squares, or parks inside compounds. The paradox of these spaces is that they tend to be even more closely monitored under the influence of the social choreography of the neoliberal space, which prefers individuals who correspond to the notion of the ideal consumer over anyone else, causing the exclusion of socially excluded groups. So, as we can see, at least from the image, that these POPs, privately owned public spaces, are much more controlled than the previous state-owned spaces or spaces of no one. And that actually is happening a big exclusion of minor groups as the homeless people or minorities, etc. Pascal Gielen sees this instrument of control as directly related to an interpretation of global political trends, such as unabated neoliberalism and the growing neo-nationalism. According to Gielen's findings, modern real estate development projects are divided into predefined zones: residential, market, creative, administration, often built on a form of gentrification strategies which swallow entire city neighborhoods. Residents of such zones hardly feel the need for a shared public space or for participation in local politics. When there's no need to defend and search for one's identity on a daily basis, there's no need to participate in anything in the public space. As a result, these zoned cities exclude politics from their streets and limit political participation just to voting in elections. Gielen states that this erases politics from everyday life and the public space is thereby completely depoliticized. In the contrary to that, or as another example, there is a work by Thomas Hirschhorn, like as an example to interrupt this corporation control mass. So there was this piece in New York in 2013, inspired by the Marxist philosopher Antonio Gramsci, War of Positions, describing the process of building up power in society by creating alternative institutions. So this platform by Hirschhorn consisted of a community bar, a library, a lecture platform, a room for children's workshop, and a local radio station. running daily programs to support inclined, discursive, and other expressive practices of autonomous culture. It is a critique of urban consumerism that suppresses the basic needs to express oneself as an individual. So, Sennett demands more anarchy in the cities. The possibility to express diversity through interaction is a way to prevent violent conflicts and to facilitate democracy. The role of the artist in a society lies in their ability to express an opinion. Art can be an inspiration to step out from the comfort zone. On the other hand, in the book Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher in 2009, whom Gielen frequently quotes, doesn't see any hope in the establishment of natural chaos hand in hand with a greater degree of anarchy, as suggested by Sennett, or modification of the public space to artist activities, as Gielen's. Fisher presents a much more dystopian picture which offers little hope other than accepting one's own responsibility for one's everyday consumer behavior. According to Fisher, the term reflexive impotence aptly describes a sort of paralysis of self-reflection. People are in a state of depressed hedonism, which is characterized less by the feeling of depression than by a combination of skepticism and a lack of will to become anything else than a perpetually overwhelmed consumer of the entertainment and other industries. People are aware of the pressing issues of today's world, but they are incapable to take an adequate stand or unwilling to pay attention to them. Based on Fisher's brilliant analysis of the state of the current society presented in the Reflexive Impotence, Immobilization and Liberal Capitalism chapter, I tend towards his more skeptical vision. In the repressive corporate city, there is no space for Lefebvre's counter-discourse, which actually borders on illegal. And it is a big question of artistic intervention that they are actually balancing on the edge of legal and illegal. It is interesting to note, in the case of public space, it is interesting to note that according to Bishop, after the movement Occupy Wall Street of 2011, artistic interventions disappeared from the streets and moved to the safety of the museums. And this is interesting. So back to Claire Bishop. And actually here a quote by Tania Bruguera. Which is called Kathleen's Whisper. So this is another example, and it's in connection to Claire Bishop, because she was a curator and quite helpful to that case. So the Kathleen's Whisper is by Tania Brugger in homage to Vladimir Tatlin's unrealized utopian monument to the Third International. And she was invited in 2009 to be part of Havana Biennale at Cuba. And she created her very straight and very political performance where she set up this speaker's corner for anyone who would like to use the freedom of speech for 1 minute, but also with the white dove and with the two guards below. So, and after each of the 1 minute, the person was taken down by these guards. So this was like a strongly political manifest against the Cuba regime. And actually, after the peace, Tania Bruguera was twice arrested in Cuba because of that, and so on. And it was a big affair that was a lot of people from the world art scene involved to actually help to this. But anyway, back. Pascal Gielen sees the instrument of control as directly related to an interpretation of global political trends, such as unabated. Yeah, and one thing back to Tania Bruguera, that There was also a very important role of the internet and of the viral videos and so on. So it is like 10 years ago, but in that time at Cuba, that were I think just 3.5% of the population that has access to the internet, but true to that or against to that, Tania Bruguera was able to make her piece very viral and very like spread around the whole society. Pascal Gielen sees the instrument of control as directly related to an interpretation of global political trends such as unabated neoliberalism and the growing sorry. Yeah. So we live in a period when a new set of conditions for the transition from an analog society to a digital one is being codified. We are testing on ourselves not only the new online mental presence, but also a new set of circumstances of our physical experiences of a public space. These new virtual and real circumstances are being transformed into a general consensus right now in a public space, unless the transformation has already been completed or asked us to do so. The situation corresponds with the state of things when the market is globally controlled by the interest of small minority of investors, rather than serving the interest of the very broad public. I can view the influence of these interests as unhealthy and the public space as an entity suffering from diseases of affluence, and believe their symptoms could lead to the diagnosis of many diseases. Though not in the literal sense, we could get the impression that the symptoms of certain disorders come very close to describing certain issues related to the public space. For example, ADHD easily associates the scattered attention caused by information overload, or the paranoid personality disorder with its symptom of quotation, harboring excessive suspicion and a tendency to twist and misinterpret neutral or friendly behavior of others as a hostile, end of quotation, could be seen in a public space as characteristic of the excessive surveillance of the population by the state and private corporations. The HDAD diagnosis is a major inspiration for thinking about the forms of public spaces in the broadest sense of the word, which includes not only the physical spaces, but also the shared media and online spaces. One study directly relates the cause of ADHD to information overload, which contrasts with the general rhetoric describing it as a disease of affluence which is 75% inherited. So that mainstream interpretation actually misses the connection of such disease with the environment that society lives in, and responsibility connect to that. Although the problem is definitely more complex than that, this hypothesis caught my interest thanks to the statement from the text that is called Hyper and Deep Attention. A quotation is, "The shift in cognitive styles can be seen in the contrast between deep attention and hyperattention. Deep attention, the cognitive style traditionally associated with the humanities, is characterized by concentrating on a single object for long periods. For example, to read a novel by Dickens. Ignoring outside stimuli while so engaged, preferring a single information stream, and having a high tolerance for long focus times. Hyperattention is characterized by switching focus rapidly among different tasks, preferring multiple information streams, seeking a high level of stimulation, and having a low tolerance for boredom." End of quotation. This is the last paragraph of my lecture, and actually I cannot see you in that room, which is really strange, so I am still reading my presentation, but we are going to finish soon. So the public space is hazy and chronically exhausted, and is an organism which needs to be cured step by step. Just as the pharmaceutical industry, which is partially ineffective due to its own internal causes, which are tied to corporate interests, for infinite profit and for economy of growth. Nevertheless, as addiction experts claim, it is hard to cure a person who systematically refuses treatment. But I keep trying, and just as conventional medicine, I provide fast-acting formulas to be taken visually, step by step, image by image. My next move is equally unclear as that of my opponents. No one can guess what is going to come, but everyone tries to reach their maximum potential. This is the end. Thank you. Hello?
Do you hear us?
I didn't hear you before, but so I have no idea if there was some reaction or not.
Yeah, everything was fine. The connection was great, and the picture was very cool. And now, if somebody has a question, we can start.
But I still don't see anyone from the room. Is it possible to change it?
To change what?
Хочется увидеть аудиторию.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, turn the
Hey, thank you for the presentation. I have actually 3 questions.
Yeah.
One is this presentation part of your bigger work on something? This is the first question. The second is you're using these concepts of by Sennett, such as order and disorder, kind of confrontational concepts, but there are other concepts in relation to public space in the city also. Like, for instance, first, the most banal thing that comes to my mind is Michel de Certeau and his concept of strategy and trajectory. And trajectory is not so pessimistic, you know, that you can do something. So you can use public space in your own way still. It's kind of problematic, but still it's interesting to think about it in that way too, and what you could say about it. Also about internet public sphere. It's also, there are different positions on that. Like, for instance, Zeynep Tufekci, she wrote about Twitter and tear gas. And it's about social media that, in a way, helped the revolution happen. But then they work bad for organization, like final organization and demands. So it's like, it has 2 sides too, like internet public space. And yeah, my last question is about actually adolescence, and whether this concept of like adolescent city has any implications, like kind of coming from adolescent culture, exactly, like different from adult culture and how it's connected. I think you have something to say about it.
Yeah. Thank you for very great questions. Really like. I made a note. So the first question, if it's part of something bigger, yes, it is. I'm finishing my dissertation text in these 2 weeks, so I'm quite desperate about that. And this is one of the chapters. Yeah. And also a part of my artist book, kind of like author's experimentation, also visually about it. Because I try to like observe the space with my camera a bit, so on. But anyway, back to the second question. Yeah, order and disorder, and as you said, as a comparison of it. And you mentioned a certain, I think, honest, that a lot of philosophers from the 20th century, from the old generations, but they are like too political. I think state of conditions now is much more like depressive, and like there's like for me no reason why to see the future in a nice, you know, nice chick. I think that the depression system is actually like more stronger and stronger. So I think it's like and like very important to believe that something could be changed. But on the other hand, we need to, as a Mark Fisher, you know, we need to uh, agree with the state of condition around us, with the things that are really, let's say, like dark. So this would be my reaction to Michel Serta, who is like excellent, like philosopher. And, I really like his work, but on the other hand, I need to be like very critical to these like false visions, you know. Uh,
Yeah, I have a commentary on this. It's yeah, it's not about like seeing everything in a nice way, because we cannot do it, right? And like Lefebvre was much more optimistic. Yeah. Yeah, but also it's just no. It's about creation of some other possibilities. Not only like this kind of confrontation wall to wall, but like kind of structures that are in between. For instance, I don't know whether it works or no. I just kind of discursive thinking.
Yeah,
like for instance, a modern harmony, undercommons, like this.
Yeah. I would also reply to that with the quotation of Pascal Gielen, because he's also tried to bring up, and I didn't mention it in my lecture, but it's interesting. He call it like common city. So city of nice utopia of gathering people art together, and he compares it to kind of like a circus where the community lives together, community, you know, and it's not in conditions of nuclear family, but in the conditions of real community that's creating something else, something new. It's also seems to be kind of hippie, nice, sympathetic. Uh, but anyway, so back to your third question. I don't know. Not familiar with the person who you mentioned, Senna. With the social media that help, that some again, I would be sorry about it, but very skeptical.